Hi everybody, welcome back to Capricorn Radio TV. This is your host James, and I'm super excited about today's show. We're going to be talking to Mark Dwayne Combs, a critical investigative researcher who's fascinated with ancient mysteries, biblical history, and the origins of man. He's an author, public speaker, blogger, and publisher. In 2013, Mark began to focus most of his attention on the motivational writing and speaking. A self-hosted webpage was developed in his weekly blog, Splinter in the Mind's Eye. In January 2015, he published his first book, End the Beginning, a non-fiction critical research volume that examines the possibility of Noah's Great Flood, cross-referencing historical texts from a number of ancient civilizations with modern-day scientific theory. End the Beginning pieces together the backstory of the life before Noah's Flood and uncovers the express purpose for the destruction of mankind. It also overlays documentation from the past with our scientific understanding of the present in an effort to project what we may have triggered the devastating chain of events. Mark's also touched on Planet X in a bit of his research before as well, and I'm really desperate to find out Mark's take on Planet X too. Part of the reason why he's here today, but we are going to focus on the book in the beginning, but we're going to launch in with Planet X. So without further ado, hi Mark, you're very welcome to the show, first of all.
James, thank you so very much. Been looking forward to this.
Me too, Mark. You know, it's funny the way the internet works. I mean, it's we've come across probably, I think it was from L.A. Marzulli and the Planet X show there, and I'm always interested in researchers' take on Planet X. There's so many researchers on this now. I'm open to a lot of ideas on Planet X. I definitely think it's a real entity, and I definitely think it's a real. I think it's a problem that we don't know for sure about cycles, or everybody's got their own opinions on the specifics or the variabilities in the equations. But I just definitely think it's a really super interesting, and there's something very tangible to it. I think that's what I'm trying to get at. There's some sort of a tangible element to Planet X, stroke Nibiru. But perhaps maybe we'll just launch into that, Mark. Tell me about your research into Planet X. What are you finding? Give me an overall picture from Mark Combs' perspective.
Well, my initial perspective was that what we saw on the internet, and much of what we do see on the internet, is simply for sensationalism. It's to get people to tune into a YouTube channel, or clickbait, so to speak. I think a lot of the stuff that's out there is very poorly researched and not presented all that well. However, having done some research, the more research I did where I found some viable information, the more and more I was being pushed with my shoulders into a corner in a position where I couldn't deny there is something out there. And that's kind of where my research led after a while. And I wanted to approach it from a responsible standpoint. I'm not a person that's given to sensationalism. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of wanted to try and separate the two items and be able to put some information out there that was not just for the sake of waving banners and setting off flashing lights, but for the sake of providing good quality information. So that's what kind of drove me to do a little bit deeper research into the area of Planet X. If it exists, what's some of the things that we can attribute to it?
If you ask me the same question, so I'm going to find it difficult to answer, but I'm going to ask you, what is it you find so tangible about Planet X?
Well, I think one of the things that's very clear as we have learned more and more about our solar system is that our solar system in the past at some point was a very violent place. Now, that is not something that people argue. What people argue about is the time frame. You know, hey, is it violent in our recent past, or was it violent millions and millions or billions of years ago and has settled down some since then? The truth of the matter is that we know that our solar system was a very violent place at one point in time. Mm-hmm. And the more I study into Planet X, the more I think that those cycles or things that are going on in our solar system didn't happen all at once. They happened over a period of a number of years. And we see the scars in our solar system throughout our solar system. And I think that's evidence that there's something else out there that we haven't really put on the charts and in the textbooks.
Wow. let's talk about the cycles of Planet X. This is the big question because if you know the answer to this, then you can predict. Uh, well, you can predict if you knew when it came, you can know when it's coming back. Knowing when it came the first time and knowing the cycles, obviously, it's a loop. You need to know one to know the other. But I know you've got a different version on the cycles, Mark. Tell us how you first of all came to that conclusion and what you think about it.
Well, I think uh, one of the primary entryways into Planet X, Nibiru, and this type of a topic, as far as information on Planet X, dates back to a scholar named Zachariah Sitchin, and a lot of people take their information from him. He projected this out of some of the research he was doing in ancient tablets, that it was on a 3,600 year orbit, and that it basically interacted with the Earth on that type of an interval. The thing that he didn't really discuss in depth in his books was the type of destruction it brings with it. He saw it as a planet that came into the solar system that housed another race, an interstellar race of beings that he refers to as the Anunnaki. And I think many folks are familiar with his work and familiar with his positioning on that. The thing that I had to study, I studied through a number of astronomers and also through space science. If you have an object similar to this, and you can put on it the attributes of any type of planetary body that would make this type of journey, then if you're going to put the attributes on it, there are certain things that are going to be evident, and the evidentiary things are destruction that comes in its path. It cannot come into play with other planets throughout the solar system without having effect on these planets, and in many aspects having a violent effect. We're accustomed to seeing the moon in our nighttime sky, sometimes our daytime sky as it goes on a different cycle, but we're accustomed to seeing the moon, think nothing of it. Sometimes we have what they refer to as a supermoon. It's really large, it's beautiful. We watch it rise or we watch it set, and we ooh and ah over the presence of the moon. But one of the things that we know that we do not think about or consider very much is the effect that the moon has on our planet. The moon draws the waters of the ocean back and forth and gives us tides. And we've been taught that from the time we were very little, and we can see the effect that it brings to us, but we don't think about it. We just see the moon up there. Well, if you were to put another planetary body anywhere near the same size of the moon, make it half the size of the moon or a quarter the size of the moon, it could not come into close proximity to the Earth without having similar effects or possibly even more drastic effects. So that's some of the things that I studied. And that's what really took me into the days of Noah and the Ark, and what type of effect a planetary body such as this might have on the surrounding planets, specifically the Earth.
Wow, you're really going for the indicators then, Mark. The logical scientific perspective, trying to work back the equation, as they say.
Well, if I watch the internet, it's coming every other week, and as soon as it doesn't show up a new video post, for the record, I did do a timetable in my book. I put it into one of the appendixes, and I put it on a 360-year cycle simply because I saw transcendent events that occurred throughout our history approximately every 360 years. Now, I did have some blank spaces in that wherein I could put a date on the calendar and say, I can't attach this to anything. That's not to say that nothing happened. That's to say I hadn't found it. So my research in that area wasn't complete. I have since found one other that I would probably go and add into the calendar at some point. But the calendar in the back of my book starts with Noah's flood, goes backward one event that's recorded for us in the book of Jasher, and maybe I'm getting a little ahead of ourselves by mentioning some of the other ancient texts that I used. But then it goes forward from there into some events that we are familiar with in our time frame in the history of man as it's been recorded. And as I began to put those events on a timeline, they actually bore out a pretty consistent cycle or path of about 360 years, give or take a few years. That being
Wow.
said, anytime you have an object that is making such an elongated orbit, uh, it would stand to reason that it would encounter some interference along the way, which would cause its orbit to be somewhat regular but not precise. Our orbit around the sun is fairly precise. We encounter some debris, we encounter a lot of debris, space debris, but it doesn't impede our orbit. But if we were to be orbiting through the system and encountering larger bodies along the way, it would impede the orbit and it would change it somewhat. So I had to apply those aspects when I began to envision the orbital journey of Planet X, and I tried to bear that out in one of the chapters of the book.
Wow. I mean, for me, I always hark back to the ERAS satellite data. I think in 1983 or was it 84? I can't remember now.
Yeah, back in that area, 83, 84.
How do you find this? Do you think this is an indicator for something that got covered up?
Well, it's kind of interesting because there was that story that got publicized in a number of places, and I mentioned that in the book because it's so widely known. Washington Post, San Francisco Chronicle, and other places. And a lot of people harken back to that and say, hey, this was a story that was out there and then no one said anything else about it. Well, I actually found that if I did a little bit more digging about the two scientists who were a part of that study, that they actually did publish papers a couple of years later and try to explain it away. Now, the thing that really caught me, James, and left me scratching my head was when they originally made this discovery and were announcing this discovery, one of the two scientists went out of his way to say this is not incoming mail. And that really caught my attention because when they discovered, I don't remember when they discovered other planets, and of course the discovery of Neptune and Uranus was before my lifetime. The discovery of Pluto was before my lifetime. In 1930, but I don't remember reading about the discoveries of those and seeing that the astronomers of the day were going out of their way to say, hey, this is not coming our way. It's just another planet that's out there. But he felt that it was necessary to point that out, that we've discovered something on the edge of our solar system and it's not coming our way. Well, it kind of made me wonder who's asking that question. And then 2 years later, they come out with additional research to explain what it was. It's interesting that neither one of their explanations really corroborated evidence, and neither one of them agreed with each other. But I included both of those in the book as well. I think that's somewhere in the middle of chapter 8, because it's questions that do come up, and people are familiar with that story, so I felt like I needed to address it.
Yeah. I don't know. For me, I just think that if the government knew about this, they're going to cover it up. This is not something you want in the public domain at any cost, in any way. I mean, how do you feel about that, Mark?
Well, there's a couple of very interesting things there, James. Number one, if the government did know about this, and they launched several space probes in our space program, they launched several space probes to specifically search for additional planetary bodies. That was the entire purpose of the Voyager program. And the Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 were launched very close to each other, and they were launched to very specific areas so that they could triangulate something. And I believe that they did. If you read about the Voyager space probes, they had on board with them, or express purpose for them, was to test or to search in our solar system as they were going to the outer reaches of our solar system for certain things. Every single one of those, and you can go to the NASA website and look at it, it gives you a list of 5 things that these 2 probes were designed to do. All 5 of those things are methods by which you would search for a planet. And so it seems kind of obvious that they were looking for something. The question is, if they found something, how would they go about making that information known? They find things all the time and tell us in passing. We had something break. In fact, I put it on my Facebook page. We had something break just this past week where they found another outer planetary body that is deeper in the reaches of space than Pluto, but they feel like it does interact with the the inner part of, not the inner part of the solar system, but it doesn't always stay that far out. They feel like that it may cross over Pluto. Now they've said it's very small bodies, but it opened up the thought again, and it just let us know how little of our solar system, how little small amount of the sky we've actually explored and mapped and have a good understanding of. The other thing is, if you were going to tell somebody, how would you go about doing that? And the first thing that comes to mind is, if the videos that we see week after week, courtesy YouTube, of Planet X were ever taken seriously, if NASA actually did come out and confirm, if some undisclosed spokesman actually did reveal, what type of effect would that have on society as a whole? It would be something that would totally undermine society as a whole and cause widespread panic and widespread unruliness. So they'd have to be very careful about how something like this is disseminated. And that's just common sense. That's not conspiracy theory. That's just common sense.
Common sense, yeah. That's the great way to put that, Mike. That's just common sense. It's like, I think most of conspiracy is common sense. I mean, that's the whole idea of a conspiracy, is like, shut it up, tie it off, hide it, and then if anybody speaks out about it, it's a conspiracy, it's not real, but
for any set of parents who have ever raised children, you know that from time to time you've had a conversation with your spouse that helped you make that other human being that's living in your house against your will at times. Mm-hmm. You've had a conversation with your spouse about, okay, how do we tell them about this? Do we tell them about this? Yeah. What do we disclose? What don't we disclose? I mean, it is common sense.
Yeah, for sure. Mark, let's go to the book and the beginning. First of all, just tell us the overall premise for the book. Give us the start to finish and the middle all in one. Why write the book? What's the book about?
The book is actually my own personal journey. And James, really, I had some time a couple of years ago where I was doing some research and had some additional time on my hand to read a little bit deeper. It gets into a story in the Bible that has always troubled me somewhat on a number of different levels. I will declare openly that I am a believer, that I do believe the Bible is the Word of God and accept it as such, but there's different stories in the Bible that we're taught as little children going to church that A, B, C, D, and just accept it on faith. Well, there were some things about the story of the flood that as I got older really made me scratch my head and question. And I don't like having troubling questions in the back of my mind and the back of my head that would cause me to doubt things. So I began to dig in. This was my own personal journey, my own search for information. And the bottom line to it was, if there was a worldwide flood, the big question is why? Why in the world do you need to destroy every living thing on the face of the planet? Why would a loving or an angry God do such? We have plenty of examples later in the Bible of populations and civilizations that were, for whatever reason, fell under the judgment of God. He didn't kill everybody on the planet. He dealt with those specific populations in various and sundry ways. But in this case, in the story of Noah and the flood, we're told that the entire planet was destroyed. And my big question was why? The second big question was how? If you're going to completely flood the planet that I live on, I need to be able to figure out how you would go about doing that. And those two things really troubled me. And the more I thought about them, the more I thought I need to research this because I wanted some answers. So that's kind of where it all started.
Wow. I know you talk a lot about Nephilim and falling angels. I mean, if you, first of all, if you talk about Planet X, you have my attention. I think it's a great philosophical talkie point, but Nephilim and falling angels and the pre-flood world as such, you have my attention as well. And I don't care if you're in the biblical camp or you're in the ancient alien camp or you're in the middle. I see from my radio show, Mark, I see three different groups of people talking about this, but all fascinating with it and all meeting. If anything, I think Nephilim and falling angels and Planet X is uniting people from all different genres of research. And I think in one respect, that's a good thing. At least there's a level of interaction between people that were always far on one side and far on the other, and it still gets heated debate. But I mean, tell us about the Nephilim falling angels and how it links with the flood.
Well, it's an interesting topic, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's something that does bring a lot of people to the table. Different perspectives and different points of view. The biblical point of view is certainly going to be somewhat different than that from the camp of the ancient alien point of view. But the truth is, in most churches, they, you know, they proclaim the miracles of Christ and the miracles of the Old Testament, but they really don't want to talk about anything when it has to do with angels, demons, these types of things. It's kind of like way out on the fringe. So it's kind of a separate little path that we walk at times, because some of our more conservative brethren would tell us that, hey, you're really stretching the truth and reading a lot in between the lines. And I have to say that there's not a lot in the Bible on this topic, but there's enough on this topic that you can say, hey, it fits within scriptures. Now, a couple of the things that we have are familiar passages in the book of Genesis chapter 6, and that launches into the fallen angels breeding with humans and producing a separate race, which was the Nephilim. Some people chase the aspect that these Nephilim were giants. They were an aberration of mankind. Not a lot of people chase or really get into the discussion of why these beings came into creation. What was the thought behind it? Why did the angels do what they do? What were they trying to accomplish in so doing? And that's an interesting topic all of its own. And so that was one that, as I was doing some research and reading in preparation for writing this, that's something that just kept bubbling to the surface as to why did this happen? Why did this go on? What is happening here on earth? We're familiar with the passage in Genesis, where some folks are familiar with the passage in Jude that talks about angels that kept not their first estate. And so now we're squarely in the camp of, okay, something went wrong in the realm of angels that just wasn't according to plan. What happened here? And so that's what I really wanted to dig into, and spent a couple of chapters of the book digging into that. The bottom line is a very simple story. You've got a handful of angels, a smaller number. The book of Enoch puts a number on it of 200 that rebelled against their mission, their calling, and decided that they wanted to create their own offspring and their own race. And the big question that's really standing out there is, why in the world would they want to do this? I mean, they are angelic beings. They have very special realm that they were created in, something totally different than mankind. Why in the world would they want to create their own race here on the earth? And I think that question often gets overlooked, James, because we forget who we are. And we forget that we were created for a very specific reason and a very special reason. And that gets back into the Garden of Eden. So I couldn't really talk about the angels without talking about the Garden of Eden.
Sure.
Really trying to put man into perspective as to why he was created in the first place.
It's the stereotypical case of a mutiny. It was a mutiny, basically.
That's a very good description of that, yes, because the earth had been given to man. It had been given to Adam. You read early in the book of Genesis, we read past it so much we don't even see it, that God placed a garden east of Eden and placed the man in the garden and gave him dominion over everything. It says it very clear. Adam had everything of creation under his thumb. It was his. He was given rulership over it all. So, the fact that, as you say, it was a mutiny of sorts. Yeah, absolutely. Not only a mutiny against God, but there was this very evident jealousy of, hey, I want what Adam has. He has the earth. He has something that we don't have. And I think that's where it all gets back to.
Okay, so the Nephilim fallen angels, these guys are pre-floods, yeah?
Pre-flood and post-flood, yes.
And the reason for the flood is because of these guys. Is that what we're saying?
Ultimately, yes, and in some aspects, no. Yes, I've got to go yes and no on that.
It's a difficult one to say. That's why I asked. It's. I mean, a lot of people want to say it's the flood judgment. Is it right to say that?
Yes, I think it's absolutely right to say that. And I think the judgment was not on the Nephilim. I think the judgment was on mankind. And I think sometimes that kind of gets overlooked. We want to give the Nephilim far too much credit. Keep in mind, they wanted what mankind had. They got what mankind had only because mankind gave it to them. And that's something that we clearly miss out on. And I've seen this as I've done more and more research. Early before the flood happens, you see the rise of the Nephilim, not only in one generation, but in several generations and descendants of the Nephilim. I do believe they put mankind under their thumb. And we see that borne out in all kinds of art from the ancient world, where you have rulers that are 2 and 3 times the size of their servants. And you say, well, that's just there to show symbolism as to respect for who the ruler was. Well, you also have these...
It's just artistic, Mark. It's just artistic.
It's not artistic. You have these same artistic rulers that are depicted with animals that are, almost the same height as a giraffe, or they're carrying lions around under their armpit. It's not artistic. These were...
My favorite excuse for that is that they say that there was a smaller breed of lion in those days. I'm like, really?
The lion cub chihuahua, and I understand that, but no. These beings were aberrations to mankind. They were fearful beings. The Book of Enoch tells us that they got to the point where man could no longer sustain them by being subservient to them, and they turned on mankind and began to eat the flesh of men. And there's many great people out there that have done research in this area and can tell those stories so much better than I can. People like Steve Quayle. They can tell these stories so much greater than I can, because that's where they've really done the research. My research has been more into what's going on with man. Why did man get into this position where he was so subservient to these beings that he just, couldn't work his way out of that? And I really believe the Bible gives us the answer to it, but we just overlook it in our haste.
The question is, are the fallen angels back again? A lot of people are speculating that. I think that's a good question to bring in.
Oh, I don't know that the fallen angels are back again, because the ones who actually did this deed of breeding with human beings and producing this aberrant race were judged, and they were bound in chains of darkness. Now, some people think that those angels have been released. I think it's key to understand that not all of the fallen angels were a part of that small group that was judged and bound away. Paul writes in the New Testament that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities and spiritual wickedness in high places. Mm-hmm. He very clearly says there's an unseen realm that we don't much pay attention to, but it does exist. And I think there are plenty of fallen angels in those aspects that are very aptly at work among mankind today, and very active in that work.
Wow. Let's paint the picture of Noah. Let's bring in Noah. Bring some perspective in on Noah the man and his legacy and his place in this whole story.
It's kind of interesting. The only thing we know of him through the Bible is one small verse in Genesis 5 that says he was 500 years of age when he had 3 sons. And, it kind of leaves you to 500 years is a long time. It kind of leaves you to wonder, well, what happened in those 500 years before he had 3 sons? As I began to sit down and write the chapter on Noah himself, his family, his 3 sons, their wives, I really thought, wow, this is going to be thin. There's just not a whole lot of information here. And then the more I dig, the more I found there in ancient texts, there's a lot of information about Noah. I went into books such as the Book of Jasher and the Book of Enoch, and was able to cross-reference with some other writers and got a lot of information out of those that allowed me to piece together a biography of Noah the man, who was from a very specific lineage that could be traced directly back to Adam, but was also someone that believed very strongly and very adamantly in the Creator God, and did not bow to the Nephilim, was not subservient to them. Mm-hmm. And that was really one of the problems that he faced. One of his companions alongside was actually not his father, but his grandfather, Methuselah, another name that many people are familiar with because of the length of life. Enoch is Methuselah's father, and Enoch tells Methuselah, you are going to be very active in Noah's life all the way up to the time of this judgment. Enoch actually prophesied the judgment, foretold it, and foretold the birth of Noah, that Noah would be the one that would, precede the human race through this judgment and into the other side. So it's very interesting, some of the things that are revealed to us there through Enoch and through Methuselah. Noah's father dies early. He dies at a relatively young age, little over 750 years old when he passes away. So he was a young man when he passed, but Methuselah and Noah had quite the relationship in the ancient world. And Noah's family, as far as his wife, comes from that same lineage, and the wives for his 3 sons actually come back from that same lineage. So the information that I thought, hey, I can't find this, I actually did. It gives the names of the wives, the names of the sons, and everything. So one of the things that I probably should point out, James, is that as I wrote through this book, I didn't get very far until I realized that I was bringing a lot of information from resources that just wasn't all that familiar. So I spent a lot of time footnoting where the information came.
See that? That's well footnoted, I must add.
There's over 20 pages of footnotes in the back of the book. If someone picked up the ebook, every single one of the footnotes, if you say, well, where in the world did Mark come up with that? Every single one of the footnotes is a hot link that will take you right to the website or right to the resource that it came from. So
that's what I like about ebooks, Mark, and digital publications. I think when you're reading something, a factual book, the fact that you can just click on a link and check the source, it's so much better than a paperback. I do still like paperbacks. Don't get me wrong.
I love paperbacks. I was never that familiar with the ebooks, and actually we took a long time before we put the ebook out. It actually came out just a few weeks ago. We finally got all the edits in for it, but I didn't realize that in the ebook that it had that capabilities, and I just think that's fabulous. That if you say, well, where did he get this information? You can click on the footnote, and it just kind of opens that window for you. That's amazing.
Mark, how do we reconcile, from a modern perspective, the idea of this longevity of Methuselah, Enoch, Noah? How do we get around, and the many others? But how do we reconcile this, Mark?
That's a really good question, because nowadays we are used to seeing people, as they approach their 70s, their body is beginning to break down on them, and they really, if you come across someone that lives to be 100 years old, well, they are just really an incredible human specimen that lived that long. But we find so much in the early literature of the Bible that these people lived, not just hundreds of years, but 500, 600, 700, 800, 900 years, 900 years, almost 1,000 years. That's really incredible. And to reconcile that, I had to look at a couple of things. One of them that's borne out in the book is that the Earth that they lived in is a vastly different planet than the one that we live on today, and tried to document that as much as I could through scientific study of what science tells us about the ancient history of our planet. The other thing that I tried to document in there was the fact that these people were created, Adam was created by God out of a perfect gene pool. And our gene pool that we have today, scientists tell us that our basic DNA strand has so many corruptions in it that make us so susceptible to diseases and things of this nature that our lifespan has been shortened and shortened and shortened. If you go in reverse, you go back to a gene pool that didn't have those same corruptions in it and didn't have the same susceptibility to the things that we fall prey to.
Wow.
So I think those things play in. Is that the final answer on it? I think those two things play into it. I do believe that they lived a long and ancient lifespan. You see that even after the flood, people living for lengthy periods of time, and different references to that, where people lived for lengthy periods of time, even shortly after the flood.
Mark, you, let's talk. I just want to jump ship and talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. I just think they're so overlooked by so many people, and of course they verify, corroborate the Book of Enoch. Maybe just talk a little bit about that. What's your take on the Dead Sea Scrolls? How
The,
important do you think these are as this research document?
the
Uh,
Dead Sea Scrolls are incredible. They are absolutely amazing. First of
mm,
all, as we find out about the background of them, they were buried somewhere around 200 years prior to the time of Christ. So somewhere around 200 years before Christ.
Interesting epoch, Mark.
Yeah, well, here's the interesting thing about it. There's a lot of things that we find in the Book of Enoch that people say, well, this is a modern book because an ancient man just wouldn't have that information until it was dug up in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And what we have in our hands as the Book of Enoch matches what was dug up in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's just really amazing. There's so many different things that you can get into there. A lot of the Old Testament texts were a part of the things that were dug up with the Dead Sea Scrolls. A complete copy of the book of Isaiah was in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that was really blistering. A lot of people don't know that, don't know this or don't realize this. That was really blistering to the Jewish religion and the Jewish rabbis
Mm.
of the day who wanted to deny Jesus Christ as being the Messiah and wanted to do so through their ancient texts. One of the things that they very highly criticized was a portion of the book of Isaiah, Isaiah 53, which speaks of the birth of Christ and
Mm-hmm.
the death of Christ. And their basic take on that was this was added many years later when the Bible was corrupted as it was being put together. And so many different things were added. What we have in front of us as the Bible just absolutely isn't accurate. This was coming from the Jewish rabbis who had, every reason in their basic religious beliefs to try to discredit Jesus Christ as the Messiah. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were dug up, one of the scrolls that was in there was a complete copy of the book of Isaiah. Isaiah 53 was in there. Another area where they said, hey, this ancient text was, just not unfounded, it's been tampered with,
Mm-hmm.
was a section in Isaiah. I want to say it's around chapter 46. Isaiah wrote his manuscript in about 750 BC, somewhere in that time frame.
Sure.
In that time frame, he called reference to a king by the name of Cyrus, who would be overthrowing the Babylonians.
Oh wow, because he has the famous Cyrus cylinder, don't we?
Well, in the book of Isaiah, he actually calls Cyrus by name, and he wrote that 200 and something years before Cyrus was born. That was in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It
Wow.
just brings chill bumps to you when you realize that these things weren't tampered with, and the Dead Sea Scrolls give us evidence of that because they were buried for 2,000 years.
Every time I talk to somebody, Mark, about the Dead Sea Scrolls, I've got, such interesting insight from people. I just think they're incredibly fascinating, and everybody's, every time I talk about them, there's such tangibility to not just the what's in the scrolls, but the whole backdrop to the material that's in the scrolls as well.
Well, that's the interesting thing about Cyrus, because he was a ruthless ruler, but when he was shown that he is mentioned in the book of Isaiah by name, and in that Isaiah, I believe it's chapter 46, it says that, he was to have the city of God, Jerusalem, rebuilt. Well, the Hebrew people, the Jews, were captive in Babylon at the time that Cyrus overthrew the city, and he took the city without a fight, without, so much as raising a sword. That was also prophesied in the book of Isaiah.
Sure.
And so as he's seeing this and he's seeing, hey, this God of the Jews prophesied me by name, taking this city, Babylon, without a fight, without a battle, and overthrowing Babylon. It was 3 or 4 days before the inhabitants of Babylon knew that they had been overtaken. I mean, it was really, if you go back and read the ancient history on that, it's really incredible. Well, that turns the heart of Cyrus, and he says, hey, you are a very special people. And he signed the decree for them to go back. Without that scroll of Isaiah, he may not have done that.
Wow. Uh, let's talk about Noah and his sons. How many sons did Noah have? Because this is a mixed report that I have.
A mixed report that you have. Okay.
Yeah,
Noah,
because I've talked to so many different people from a lot of people think he had a lot more sons, and he had illegitimate sons. And how many sons do we know that he definitely had?
that's a really good question, James. I like that one. He had three sons that are considered of his lineage. Now, some people do project that he had a lot of other offspring, or that other people helped him build the ark. And I cannot rule that out. One of the things that in researching the book, you read in the book of Genesis that he gave birth to three children, and it lists the name of the sons. Excuse me, it doesn't list them in the order of their birth. It lists them in the order of their importance. It lists the, it lists the name. It lists Shem first, Ham, the youngest son, second, and Japheth, who's actually the oldest son, lists him third. And so many people get that confused because they're not listed in the order of their birth. They're listed in their importance.
Wow.
As you read through the book of Jasher, you find information about Noah's wife, who's named Naamah, and it gives you the details of the birth of Shem and Japheth. That's one of the places where you can find that Japheth was the firstborn, Shem was the secondborn. Mm-hmm. The lastborn child was Ham. It does not say that she's born of Naamah, which leaves open the question, or begs the question, was she born of someone else? And if Ham was born of someone else, would there have been other children that were born of someone else? It's a very interesting question, one that I put out to a lot of scholars when I came across it, and was told by a number of them, I don't really like what you're saying here, but I can't refute it. So,
well, we got in our Irish mythology, we have a thing about the sons of Noah, maybe possibly some of them coming, illegitimate sons anyway, coming to Ireland. It's in our Irish mythology. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I'm very open to it, though.
Well, as I'm researching the second book, that's one of the things that will come into the research for my second book.
Wow.
Because it's my wife, as she read through this book and read through the end of it, she said, now I want to know where it goes from here. How does an 8-person campsite turn into Kingdoms of the Ancient World? And I said, well, I'm still working on that.
Yeah, well, they say that Magog, the sons of Magog, that they came, migrated into what we call Ireland. I mean, we have our Irish mythology has a Christian link. That's the funny thing. I mean, we have this unusual. It's great to talk to a scholar like yourself as well, Mark, but. We have this unusual thing where the ancient Irish, the Celts, they were meeting the Celtic monks, the Christian monks from the Celtic dominions, and there was an effort to Christianize the Celts, and in the dialogues, they said, well, what's your history? So they wrote down the oral histories, and they talked about a flood, and they talked about a migration, and they talk about the sons of Noah in there, and it's a bizarre, quirky tale that we may have had a lineage back to Noah. Bizarrely, there is evidence of a flood that hit the west of Ireland in about 6000 BC.
Wow. It is really interesting. And again, this gets into an area where I thought the research would be very difficult, and I was surprised how easy it was. It's something that we don't teach children when we're teaching them about world history. I remember when I was learning about world history, I thought all of these civilizations just, happened within a bubble, that, there was Egypt, and then at another time there was Assyria, and then at another time there was Babylon. And I had no idea of the connections between all of these civilizations. I found in doing some research that so many of the countries of Europe and the nations of Europe, in their chronicles, in their historical chronicles, they date their lineage all the way back to one of Noah's 3 sons. And it's really interesting. You find that same thing in some of the countries of the Far East, and some of the countries of Africa in that area. It's amazing how much information is out there on that has just been lost over a period of time.
Wow. What do you hope to people? I like to ask this question as a general question sometimes, Mark. What do you hope people to get from the book? Do you hope to enlighten people for something? What's the overall aim for the reader?
Uh, Honestly, I was very fortunate in writing this book. I gave you a little bit of my background. My brother, I have a brother who's 14 years older than me. It was very traumatic when he turned 65. I realized that I was getting old, but he's 14 years older than me, but he grew up in the church as well and very studied, very scholarly, taught Sunday school and everything. So I had him on one side of the aisle. On the other side of the aisle, I had my lovely wife, Kathy, and she grew up in the western part of the United States, did not have a background in church, did not have a background with Sunday school stories, etc. And so all of this was very fresh and new to her. She knew the name Noah, she knew the basic idea of the flood, of the ark, etc. But this was very, very new to her. So I had those two backgrounds as I was working my way through this as people who were doing proofreading and test reading for me. I could make sure that on one hand, I was staying true to that person who considered themselves a scholarly person who is fairly knowledgeable in the area, and keeping them somewhat intrigued in the story as it unfolded. On the other side, I could make sure that for the person who had very little knowledge, perhaps none at all, and this was all new to them, that I was giving them enough information along the way that they could follow the story, enjoy the story, and see where it was leading. The major thing that I'd like people to get from this, James, is just come to it with an open mind with your questions and be critical. Just be critical. I'm not asking anyone to take my opinion, share my opinion, and just when they get to the last page of the book go, my goodness, Mark has it all right, and this is just the best thing I've ever read. It explains everything. Be critical. Question. If you can come up with something that you feel like that maybe I've overlooked or maybe I need to research a little bit deeper, I'm on the internet. Look me up. Send me the information. I came to it with a critical mindset and let the evidence drag me where it needed to. And that's all I ask of the reader.
Sure. Well, today's author is Mark Combs. His website is markcombsauthor.com. His book is End the Beginning. I guess, Mark, just a final question to wrap things up, and I have the web page up there for people. They can check it out. You've got your books and your audio and your podcast. It's great. I've been going through some of the stuff. I love it. And I believe you have your own radio show as well, Mark. Is that correct?
I do my own podcast. I've had a little bit of technical difficulty the last couple of weeks, and thankfully we got that worked out in time today that we could do this interview. But I've had some interesting guests in on my podcast. I have a lot of other invitations out for other people, but yeah, if you want to click on any of the podcasts and give those a listen, it's great. I really appreciate folks that do that.
Sure. Well, 3 years ago, I couldn't, I didn't know how to record a Skype call, and 3 years later, I have 700,000 listens a month on YouTube and all the channels, but it's crazy for me. So stick with the technical details. There's help out there for you if you want. But Mark, I guess what's changed for you? Do you have a change of perspective when you wrote the book? A final question, I guess.
I did actually, and it's really surprising. By the time I got to the end of this, I had a much greater appreciation for history. There's so much information out there that's available to us, especially now that we have the internet. I mean, the things that you'll see put in my book, that's one of the reasons why I put in so many footnotes. This is not hidden information. It's information that's out there that anyone can get to, and you can put the puzzle pieces together for yourself if you want to do the research. The one thing that really stood out for me was a far greater appreciation of history, and the amount of information that we have at our fingertips is just absolutely mind-boggling.
Sure. Well, Mark, you are contactable on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and get over to Mark's site, sign up, subscribe, and get involved. And it's always great talking to new, interesting people, Mark. I thank you for your research and I thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. MarkCombsAuthor.com. You can check everything about today's guest there. Mark, thank you for your time, brother. It's been great.
Thank you so much. And if folks go to my website, there's an opportunity to sign up for my newsletter. I send out a newsletter every other week, and there's an opportunity to sign up for that. James, this has been awesome. I really appreciate the opportunity to join you today.
Sure. We'll do it again in the not too distant future, Mark, for sure.
All right, my friend.
You take care, brother.
Thank you. You too.
There is something majestic in the land of Ireland. This is known the world over. The Celtic Irish are descendants of the Tuatha De Danann, a mysterious, supernatural race of gods written about in ancient Irish Gaelic texts. This is the basis for all Irish mythology, and our megalithic ancestors are interlinked with these peoples. You have a chance to come and see these monuments and temples for yourself. The megalithic landscape is rich in the realms of myth, legend and wisdom. Come see all this on the most spectacular Sacred Sites tour in March 2016. This Sacred Sites and Equinox tour is not to be missed. Tour highlights include Grinnin of Ailloch Observatory, the Giant's Ring Henge and Dolmen, St. Patrick's Day Special at St. Patrick's Ancient Chair, March 17th, Knockmany Passage Tomb linked to the Queen Maeve with special access, Beemore Temple Complex, Dunluce Castle, the Giant's Causeway, Beltany Stone Circle, Kilclooney Dolmen, and the Loughcrew Equinox Event Alignment. Of course, we will see the famous tombs of Newgrange, Noath and Doath, also Fornox Rock Art and Shamanic Chamber, Tara Hill Complex, and we're going to finish at the Tuatha De Danann's origins in the northwest of Ireland at Carrowkeel, dated 3500 BC, and the famous Carrowmore 5000 BC complex. Check out all the full itinerary on the Tours Events page for more details at jamesswagger.com.
Rooms, right? And then you got the inner sanctum.
You can see where this was probably covered over. This overlap here. It would have corbel vaulted and overlapped this chamber here. So this would have had a covering. This would have had a covering. And this is all just backfilled to make the mound up, which has been reduced down to nearly ground level.